Hi, everyone, and welcome to Emotional Food Freedom. I am Carrie Ross, Australian clinical nutritionist from the Mind Body Belly Academy Biome Integrative Nutrition. I am a master NLP practitioner, hypnotherapist, food behavior counselor, timeline therapist, and so many more things, and clinical nutritionist. And I'm going to speak with you candidly about emotional and disordered eating, bariatric surgery nutrition, which is one of my passions, and self-empowerment, the other one of my passions. And I help you to get your transformation and live your best life, breaking free of the struggle between food and living to your best potential. Now, in today's episode, we're going to talk about carb cravings. Is it carb cravings or emotional eating, or am I addicted to carbs, or what is it? What is it that I have a problem with? Sugar and carbs, why are they my problem? Now, the tricky thing is that sugar and carbs, well, we actually need carbohydrates and sugars to fuel our cells. Glucose metabolism is our primary energy production mechanism. So what that actually means is our bodies choose to use the path of least resistance every time. The less fight it needs to give, the more preferable that option is. So sugar is its preferred option of fuel. And that glucose metabolism, primary energy production mechanism, big words, right? What we're saying is that your body uses sugar as its preferred source of fuel every time. Of course, your body can run on alternate fuels like fat, and we've experienced this when we've looked at ketogenic diets and all of that. However, glucose is your body's preferred source of fuel. So what do you think your body needs to do to get into a non-preferred fuel source, or to use, say, so I'll use the terms primary as the number one, secondary number two, and tertiary for number three. Now, fat burning is a tertiary mechanism. It's the number three preferred fuel, or the number three option when it comes to fuel burning. What do you think you need to do to get into that system? Well, basically, you need to put your body through physiological stress. So you need to put your body into a stress state where it feels like it's starved of its preferred fuel, so it needs to seek out an alternate option. Why is that a problem? Well, ultimately speaking, if you listen to the previous episodes, and I do encourage that you do, because it's going to give you some foundational knowledge in terms of the terms that I'm using and ideas and concepts that we talk about when we talk about the hunger mechanisms. So we've got hedonic and homeostatic hunger. But when you think about homeostatic hunger, true hunger, and hedonic hunger, which is your environmentally, situationally, emotionally triggered hunger, enjoyment hunger, eating for the heck of it, eating to make ourselves feel good rather than to fuel our bodies. When we think about that, our body's always trying to get a sense of balance. It's always trying to make this homeostasis. Homeostasis means perfect balance, harmony within all the systems. So your body's always trying to reach that point of homeostasis where everything's kind of chugging along. There is a manageable amount of stress. There is a manageable amount of impact or burden on the body. Everything's working at its optimum. Well, and your optimum might not be 100%. You might be only working at about 40% right now, but that's your optimum for your body right now. And we can improve that, and we'll talk about that in later episodes. But you and your body are always trying to find balance. So it stands to reason your body's going to look for the path of least resistance every time. And the path of least resistance is seeking its primary fuel source. And how does it do that? Well, it instigates cravings. And a lot of the time when we think about emotional eating, those cravings are centered around, I guess, emotional food behaviors. But those response loops that I talked about in an earlier episode, response loops, where we act in response to a trigger, whether it's environmental, situational, conflict, doesn't matter what it is, that emotional trigger, we act in response to that. And then we display or exhibit a habit or exhibit a behavior. So we get triggered, we do the behavior, and then that behavior generally centers around something hyperpalatable. So those extremely tasty foods, high sugar, high fat, processed, easy to digest, all of those things that your body's saying that it wants as a primary fuel source. And that makes us feel good for a little bit of time. So we then start that process again. So it keeps on going round and round. So it becomes a cemented process, a response loop. It becomes a habitual cycle. And we continuously go around in this cycle. So when we actually seek those sugars and those carbs, it's because our body is trying to act in response to an external stimulus, and it's using its go-to mechanism, which is one of our response loops that we've created, and we can break those, right? But like I said, the tricky thing is that we actually need carbohydrates and sugars to fuel ourselves, and that sugar use is our primary fuel system. And your body, yes, it can switch into a tertiary fuel source. We can force it to do so, but you put your body under physiological stress to get there. And it's important to note that carbohydrates are very important for female hormone balance, female hormone production, even male hormone production, but more so for females. They fuel our muscles for exercise. So that energy burst that you get with exercise, that's caused by glucose that's stored in your muscles. So carbohydrates are very important for a lot of different reasons, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but the problem that we have isn't carbohydrates themselves, it's refined or processed sugars, or overconsumption of the refined and processed sugars. The question is, well, why do we find ourselves in this spiral anyway? Why do we crave and overconsume these things? And of course, there's going to be a number of reasons. We've got actual hunger as one of them. Now, bodies trigger cravings in response to an energy deficit, and you need to ask yourself, have I eaten balanced, throughout the day? Is there a balanced selection of foods that I've chosen throughout the day to meet those needs? Your body doesn't care where it gets the sugar from. It just knows that it needs it. It's learned it can get it from quick processed refined sugar through your response loops. So it's going to encourage you to do that. The path of least resistance, of course. But the problem with those processed refined sugars are they are quickly absorbed, used, and spent, leading us to want to top up that tank even sooner. So it's like using the cheap fuel versus the premium fuel. Cheap knockoff fuel versus aviator fuel, or use whatever analogy you want for that. But there is a difference in the quality of the fuel that you put in. So, and I'm not going to start, jumping down your throat about eating all organic and, all whole foods and things like that. But we can make small adjustments to find more balance in our diets. And that's the point. We're all human and we all enjoy food. And if we didn't enjoy food, what a horrible world this would be. Because food has so many roles other than just fueling our bodies. There's community, there's connection, there's celebration, there's grieving. There's so many different reasons why we use food, and to remove or delete that from our model of the world would be devastating, to say the least. But anyway, let's move on. What else could trigger these carbohydrate cravings? Well, interestingly enough, not being hydrated enough. Why would that be the case? Why would being thirsty cause you to want to have sugar? Well, interestingly enough, sugar draws water into the small intestine. It draws water into the gut. So it helps remove water from your cells and brings it into the digestive tract. That's the first thing. But it also instigates a response. So if you don't have enough fluids in your system, if you're a bit dehydrated, you may crave sugar because you've created a response loop that when you have sugar, you'll have a drink with it. So it's one part habitual loop, other part physiological loop, right? What's another one? Another one is, have you slept enough? So a lack of sleep can cause that hormonal imbalance that we talked about, fatigue, and that can lead you to the cookie jar. Because again, carbohydrates are necessary for the production of hormones. In many cases, cortisol requires carbohydrate, and cortisol is responsible for our sleep-wake function, for restful sleep, for our hunger and satiety, so our fullness cues and our hunger cues. And if they are in short supply because of lack of sleep or stress, or they're getting overproduced, we need more sugar or more glucose in our system to regulate those and find that balance that our body is always seeking. So again, it may not be the fact that you're addicted to carbohydrate. It may be the fact that you're addicted to overwhelm in your life, or you don't have clear boundaries to say no with people, or you don't enforce your clear boundaries with yourself and tell yourself to go to bed at an appropriate bedtime. You've got that revenge bedtime procrastination where you think, oh God, the kids have gone to bed. I've got 2 hours to myself. I'm going to use both of those hours. It doesn't matter if it's 9 o'clock and I won't get to bed till 11:30, and I still got to get up at 5 anyway to start the day again tomorrow. But that doesn't matter. I've got 2 hours to myself. So I'm going to binge watch this show regardless of feeling exhausted, right? What else have we got? We've got stress and emotional impact, and I touched on that just briefly just now, but just like not getting enough sleep, stress causes biochemical change. And stress hormones are eased by that feel-good hormone we get from sugar, dopamine, right? And dopamine is one of those key factors in those response loops. Why would we stop doing something if one of the results of it is getting a boost of feel-good hormones? Wow. What do we do to get over that? Well, just quietly on that one, I'll just do a little bit of a sidestep here. What do we do to combat the dopamine release that we get from sugar? Because that really cements that response loop, doesn't it? It's almost like addiction, and it is an addiction cycle. But food addiction is so much different because food is a necessity of life. So it's not something that you can just give up cold turkey, for lack of a better analogy, of course. So thinking about it that way, you can't just sidestep food, and then you've got that dopamine imprint in there that's really cementing the behavior. So what do you do? Now, this is what I do with my top tier clients when we get into coaching together. We make a pact that we are going to dedicate ourselves to this process, and they overcome every time. Just let me say, they overcome every single time. But we find the strategy that matches their actual need. And it takes a bit of digging. We do our timeline therapy, we do our hypnotherapy, we do NLP, which is neuro-linguistic program. We work on clinical nutrition, we work on counseling. We dig down to the root of the trigger, and we release those negative emotions and limiting beliefs surrounding the reasons why you're eating to satisfy that hedonic need, that hedonic hunger, that emotionally, situationally, environmentally, memory, feeling triggered eating. All right. So it's important to understand that your individual circumstances play a huge part in your eating patterns, your mindset, your environment, stress, sleep hormones. Your current medical conditions are a big one to factor in as well. Do you have a medical condition that causes hormonal disruption? Very important to factor that in, because not eating to support that can actually induce more cravings. For instance, a good example of this is women that have gone on to go and have bariatric surgery. Sorry, just pause for a second. I'm just going to have a sip of my drink because my throat's a bit dry. Beautiful. All right, so women that have gone on to have bariatric surgery, but previous to that, they experienced hypothyroidism, PCOS, or another type of hormonal imbalance. Now, they go on to have bariatric surgery, and what gets jammed down their throats every single time is protein, 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 protein. Stay away from the carbs. Protein, portion sizes, protein, portion sizes. It's almost like this train: protein, portion sizes, protein, portion sizes. And it's infuriating, absolutely infuriating. My background is in clinical nutrition, but it's integrative holistic nutrition. So what I do is I look at the individual circumstances and I tailor to the individual. And this is something that mainstream medicine does not tend to do. You're all basically numbers, which is disgusting to me, but that's me projecting my own feelings on the situation. But sometimes you go into a place, and instead of being treated like the number one, when you think about the picture of a number one, it's nice, tall, skinny number one, you get treated like a big fat zero, a faceless fat person that doesn't get the time and attention that they require, because all that is seen is the image on the outside rather than the underlying condition or the underlying factors. But a woman that's had who has hypothyroidism, that's gone to have bariatric surgery, who focus on nothing on protein afterwards, will lose weight in the initial instances, just like everybody does, because let's face it, bariatric surgery is surgically induced starvation. But after a while, that will slow down. Their weight loss will be sluggish, you will stall, you will plateau. And why is that? It's because your hormones, your endocrine system requires carbohydrates for function. You need to put sugar in your system. Why? Because sugar promotes the production of insulin. But why is that important for hypothyroidism? Because insulin is really important for converting thyroid hormone. Wow, mind blown. So if you're not getting enough carbohydrates, you're going to do more damage to your thyroid than what you would by avoiding them. So a balanced diet that's tailored to you is necessary. So let's have a look at some other reasons why you might be carb binging. Now, don't get off the wrong foot here. This is not an anti-carb podcast or a full-on promotion of carbs podcast. I promote balance. It's freedom around food. We don't want to have any kind of negative or overly positive feelings towards any macro, whether it be protein, fats, or carbs, or whatever. We want pure, unadulterated science and balance so that we can let go of the emotions that are attached to food, right? So I'm not about carb bashing, but rather explaining some reasons why you might be prone to overdoing them. And like anything, that can be overdone and it can be undone, and we can rewrite the story. You might need a little bit of help with that, and you know where I am if you need that help. But number one is stress. So stress, both physiological and psychological, have a very real capacity to place strain on our bodies, our basic functions. And when exposed to the stress and the sympathetic nervous system is triggered, you might have heard of it referred to as that fight or flight. And with this response, adrenaline and cortisol are released, and these neurotransmitters help the body fight or run away, right? And in modern times, we tend to do neither. So when our stress hormones are not depleted by our physical actions of fight or flight or fawn or flee or freeze or whatever they are in your life, they continue to build. Those hormones build, those neurotransmitters, those stress hormones, they build, they accumulate and overwork our adrenal system, which can eventually suffer its own fatigue. It's called adrenal fatigue. It's not a I guess a diagnosed syndrome or disease, but you can see when the adrenals are not working to their fullest potential. So when the adrenals no longer produce adequate adrenaline, cortisol, and then cortisol is stolen and to be used in its place. So when cortisol is stolen from its primary job, and I mentioned that before, there's a couple of primary jobs that it does. It does a whole slew of jobs, but a couple of the main ones are our sleep-wake, so our circadian rhythm, the way that we get tired and wake up, our energy kind of regulation system, and our hunger and satiety. It's also important for the regulation of thyroid hormone and all of that sort of stuff as well, but hunger and satiety and sleep-wake. So our rest, our digest, our fuel. It's really important hormone. So when it's stolen to be, to be used for somewhere else, it needs to be replenished. And how does it need to be replenished? Well, it needs to be stimulated to be produced. And how does it get stimulated to be produced? Okay, we crave carbohydrates because it needs glucose, it needs sugar to be produced, right? So given that we need it for other functions like that regulation of hunger and satiety, our sleep-wake cycles, the body creates more and more. And like I said, interesting, carbohydrate is needed for the production of cortisol. So the more stressed you are, the more cortisol you produce, and the more carbohydrate, tongue-tied. Maybe I need some carbohydrate. the more carbohydrate you crave to help you make it, right? So that's when we carb hunt, when we're stressed. And we're like, oh, okay, well, I'm emotionally eating. I'm a stress eater. You are a cortisol depletion eater, right? Hormone imbalance, that's another one. So, and I touched on that before. So we already did the carbs aid cortisol production. So, but what else? You'd be surprised if I told you that they played that, important role in thyroid function and other ones and stuff. Well, they do, because insulin is required to convert inactive thyroid hormone into its active form. And again, carbohydrate is hands down the best stimulator of insulin. And for those with underactive thyroid function, not getting enough can impact your thyroid function further, leaving you feeling flat, tired, gaining weight, and all leading right back into stress. I'm a tired eater. No, I am a thyroid depleted eater. I'm an insulin depleted eater. But I transfer these physiological signs and symptoms into emotions because that's the only way that I can understand them, right? Skipping meals. Now, this one should be a no-brainer because your body requires a certain volume of fuel and a fairly regular schedule to function adequately. And skipping meals ensures that you do not meet those requirements. And that's even harder if you've had bariatric surgery, right? Because your portions are smaller, and then you've got the idea in the back of your head that's been cemented in there that if I eat when I'm not hungry, I'm doing a disservice to myself. But you're not going to be hungry after bariatric surgery, so you do need to eat to a schedule, and you do need to eat when you're not hungry. It's a bit of a, sorry about the swearing here, but a bit of a mind fuck, right? But I want you to think of it this way. Your body is like a car engine. I mean, it's totally not, but for the purpose of this analogy, let's say it is. It's like a car engine. It has a need for fuel, so its parts will run and propel the shell that encases it to charge, and then to charge its battery, right? So your body is the shell, and the inside your internal systems is the motor, and the fuel needs to be specific to the vehicle. It might be a diesel, or it might only hold so much, and whatever. By skipping meals, you're essentially trying to drive that car to the next town on an empty tank. Sure, the battery will hold charge for a while and the lights will go on, but without fuel and charge, it's going to end up parked for a long time. So how many of you have been parked for a long time? I was parked for a really long time. I was parked for about 15 years of my life. And when I say parked, I was still able to go out and work and do all that stuff, but I was miserable. I was not driving to my best potential. I was not driving winding roads and beautiful country routes, and that I was driving on autopilot, and it was miserable. I was parked for a really long time. So I want you to think of your carb craving as your fuel light flashing. You're on empty. But your body, yes, let's understand that your body is more sophisticated than that. It's a learning machine. It learns that quick, easy, absorbed, simple energy is from simple, refined carbs. It's that response loop I keep talking about. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to the first few episodes. They're only short ones to get you up to speed on the foundations. But it's going to crave those simple, refined carbs, and you crave all that junky stuff. The hyperpalatable foods. The extremely tasty, sugar-filled, fried, fatty, delicious. And it learns to store a little fuel, which we call fat, but it learns to store a little fuel to stop you from conking out. Because when you put your body into a physiological stress state where you're not getting the fuel that your body or your car requires, it has this beautiful mechanism of switching into a different fuel mode. But that's stress, right? It's a stress response. So just think of how far and how well you'd run on a full tank of premium fuel, right? Okay. Got little beeps and bops coming up in the background on my computer. It's annoying when that happens. But anyway, let's keep on going along. What's next? We've got depression and anxiety. And again, this is a no-brainer. When people talk about depression and anxiety, they talk about carb cravings, they talk about emotional eating. But here I go again, talking about neurotransmitters. But this time in particular to serotonin and dopamine. Serotonin is a funny one. And with the majority of our serotonin being produced in our gut by our gut bacteria. So did you know that gut bacteria, they feed on carbohydrate and their metabolites, and just quietly, when I say metabolites, we're talking about bacteria being a live thing that eats and it produces waste. But in that waste are enzymes. And those enzymes are the precursors or the building blocks of serotonin. How mad is that? That's absolutely amazing that we require good bacteria to help us feel good. Wow. Right, so we've got our gut bacteria feeding on our carbohydrate. So it's no wonder that our body sings out for carbohydrate when we're feeling down. Because serotonin is generally low when we're feeling down, chronically down, right? Dopamine is released in response to joy, and it's our feel-good hormone. And again, an easy link to make when we're feeling at our worst. But of course, we seek joy. But joy can be addictive. And again, within my top tier coaching clients, we work on finding true joy. We work on finding a strategy that matches, because my analogy here is that you don't feed a hungry lion carrots. And when I say what's a hungry lion, we're talking about your joy. And we say carrots, we say food or the Doritos or the cheesecake. If you want joy, you seek joy, not Doritos, right? So don't feed a hungry lion carrots. It's not what he's asking for. Now, if depression and anxiety, and I just want to pre-frame this conversation on depression and anxiety, if it's a long-standing issue and you've not considered your mental health as a culprit, a review with your GP and going on a mental health plan, seeking out the services of somebody like myself to help you through that may be worthwhile, because mental health is not something to play with. It's another one. Not enough sleep. We talked about this before. Sleep is fuel. Sleep is fuel in of itself. And if you haven't thought about sleep as one of your triggers to eating or carbohydrate craving, maybe you should start thinking about it. Sleep is our body's way of minimizing external output while attending to our internal function. So it does cellular repair, toxin and waste removal, even down to the relaxation of muscle fibers that have had their workout for the day. Right? Did you know that when we lose weight, we do the most of it, majority of it, while we sleep? No, it's a common misconception that when we lose weight, we tend to wee it out or poo it out, or it comes out of our bodies in our sweat or whatever. We actually breathe it out. It gets broken down by a process of oxidization. So for us, our bodies to be able to do that, one, we need to, A, get enough oxygen in, but B, also get enough of that beautiful H2O. Because H2O contains oxygen, our water contains oxygen, and that's how we get oxygenated cells, right? Okay, and then we break down our fats in the process of oxygenation. And then we breathe out the byproduct, carbon dioxide. Got carbohydrates in the brain. Right, so sleep is our body's way of minimizing that external output, external stress. It's our body's way of trying to restore that balance and recharge the internal battery. But without enough sleep, we're running on low charge. So we seek more fast absorbed energy to keep us going, so those sugars. But there's not enough spark to ignite the fuel we're consuming. We don't burn it as efficiently. We slow down, and that's when our tires get flat. We start to store that fuel because it gets burnt too quickly. Short, sharp bursts, right? That's also when our waistband tends to start to expand. Sleep, as mentioned, is impacted by cortisol, and we know that that tricky little hormone is responsible for hunger and satiety, sleep and wake, sugar and salt cravings, and behind it, a lot of unwanted weight gain. We've also got overtraining and underfueling. Okay, again, another no-brainer. The same explanation in a different scenario. You're putting out too much without putting enough in. Constantly running on empty will cause your body to stall, plateau, retain, and crave. It's telling you that you need more fuel to get you to where you need to go. But remember, the opposite is also worth a mention. Too much in and not enough out will also find you looking for the next size up. What about if you're ignoring your full signals as well? This one is a really tricky one to combat after bariatric surgery because, again, people don't know what full feels like, or they ignore it because what's on their plate visually seems like not enough. So it does that little bit of a mental game. And sometimes it's hard to recognize, especially because of subtle daily changes in our digestive routine can make our portions vary in size. But what I'm referring to here is letting the enjoyment of the carb lead to overindulgence of the carb. Oh, it tastes so good, just one more bite. One of the reasons why this can be an issue for some is because they restrict carbohydrates so heavily on a daily basis that when they do partake, it's a sensory overload. It's hyperpalatable, right? It becomes a hedonic response loop triggering thing. And it's an overload of taste and enjoyment, a rush, a feel-good hormone, a pleasure. It soon becomes that carb binge. And this is also true for unbalanced intake, not consuming enough balanced meals throughout the day or over-restriction of calories. You're gonna want to overconsume when you get a chance. All or nothing, right? But it's not what we do with emotional food freedom. It's not what we do with the Mind Body Belly Academy. I can't even speak today. I've been speaking too much this morning. But it's all right. Bear with me. I'm human. I own it. That's not what I do. I help you overcome those triggers, let go of those limiting beliefs, those negative emotions, to overcome that thought, right? To be able to overcome the negative emotional belief around the food that says to you that you have to restrict or deprive to be good. Because you don't. It's all about balance, right? Your aim should be to eat sufficiently and routinely enough to ensure nutrition and energy requirements are being met and balanced, and therefore avoiding those carb binges. And here is my other passion in life, and the one that I help people break free of for good, is addictive food behaviours. I mean, it follows on from the previous discussion that we've been having, but addictive food behaviours are developed from the seeking of gratification or emotional response from food, joy-seeking activity, balance-seeking activity, or protective behaviours, so trying to avoid negative emotions with eating. For instance, you might be trying to eat to soothe stress or sadness, or eating to cheer yourself up, or eating to celebrate, or eating, whatever it might be. And it's true that the food we enjoy, that we really enjoy, releases dopamine, our ecstasy, our joy neurotransmitter hormone, that addictive response loop creating hormone. And we know that release of dopamine is addictive. We want it because it makes us feel good, right? And that's why more than 50% of what I talk about and do is reestablishing appropriate food relationships. The carbs aren't the issue here. It's what you're using them for and what they're addressing. Remember, like I always say, it's not about what you're eating, it's about what's eating you. Your body, the way that it is right now, the extra weight that you carry is not a result of you being dissatisfied with your body. It's a result of you feeling dissatisfied with your life. The way that you eat is represented by your body, and that body represents dissatisfaction with your life. You're not meeting your joy. You've been feeding a hungry lion carrots. Right, so what I want to do is in the next episode is talk about the importance of personalized diet plans, the importance of balance, and give you some tips around finding that balance in your diet long term to get your own emotional food freedom. So please go back and listen to the first episodes to get your foundation on what I talk about, so just so that you're not missing any terms. And if you're ready to make that change in your life and ready to step up and say yes, if you're ready to say, look, I need to take action to get my transformation and I want my transformation now, then hit me up. Send me an email, send me a DM, send me a message. You can find me at Mind Body Belly Academy mbbacademy.com.au, so mbbacademy.com.au, or biomeintegrativenutrition.com.au. You'll find me on Facebook. You can join the free Emotional Food Freedom group. But do something. Take action. Because the only way that you'll get out of this discomfort is by taking action now. All right, I'll talk to you in the next episode. Thanks for being here.